So I'm going to start with a graveyard, which might be not make any sense right now. But so this is, I want to start in a graveyard in Georgia in 1880. And I'm just going to read you a story that was written by, recounted by Henry Grady in the 1880s about a funeral that he attended in Georgia. So he says, "The grave was dug through solid marble, but the marble headstone came from Vermont. It was in a pine wilderness, but the pine coffin came from Cincinnati. An iron mountain overshadowed it, but the coffin nails and the screws and the shovel came from Pittsburgh. With hardwood and metal abounding, the corpse was hauled on a wagon from South Bend, Indiana. A hickory grove grew nearby, but the pick and shovel handles came from New York. The cotton shirt on the dead man came from Cincinnati, the coat and breeches from Chicago, the shoes from Boston, the folded hands were encased in white gloves from New York. That country, so rich in undeveloped resources, furnished nothing for the funeral except the corpse and the hole in the ground, and would probably have imported both of those if it could have done so. As the poor fellow was lowered to his rest on coffin bands made in Lowell, he carried nothing to the next world to remind him of his home, save the halted blood in his veins, the chilled marrow in his bones, and the echo of the dull clods that fell on his coffin lid." So that's a kind of funny story, but we'll look at what it actually means. He's telling the story about Georgia, but nothing on the dead man comes from Georgia or is made in Georgia. So that happened in 1880, and that's a long time ago now. But I bet you guys could kind of let's imagine a funeral in the Berkshires and fill in the blanks here. If we imagine the same thing happening in the Berkshires, where would the headstone be coming from? Would it be probably be made of solid marble, but would the marble be from here? I don't know where do you guys know where marble comes from nowadays? Where would we get it? Because we have lots of stone here. We used to have quarries. We used to have the stone in the Washington Monument came from West Stockbridge, and a lot of the brownstone that's in Brooklyn came from around here. All this stone that used to be quarried here, but we don't do that anymore. I mean, we might have some quarries, maybe 2 quarries. And then we have pine trees all around us, right? But I think our coffins, I don't know where our coffins come from. If anybody knows where any of these things come from now, jump in.
Probably not here, though.
Not here. We have a lot of iron deposits around here. We used to have iron ore forges and mines. But now, I talked to a hardware store owner, and he says that all of the nails and everything come from China. When he was young, they all came from America. They were all made in America, but now they're from China. And our means of transportation are usually made cars, and where would a hearse be made now? Japan. Maybe Detroit. Maybe. Wooden handles. If it's even made of wood. We don't know where it's from, right? And then how about clothes? What about the clothes that you're wearing? Thailand. I think probably Vietnam. Maybe Mexico. It might be put together in Mexico. Not in the U.S. anymore. He was complaining that they were made in faraway cities from Georgia, but nowadays be even further away, right? So right now he was talking about a system where there wasn't a local economy in Georgia making things for that local funeral. Now we have a global system that is so huge and so spread out that we don't even know where anything comes from, right? We don't know, or if we do know where it comes from, it's because on the label of our clothes it says made in China. Oh, this was made in the U.S., but that was because it's old. But so he was talking about a sort of American system. Now we have a global system, and what happens when you have a global system? Like, if you don't know where your clothes are coming from, what does that mean? What are the implications of that? Why would that be, like, what happens? Like, if you know who's making your sweater.
There's no quality in it. That's disconnected. Like, you don't see how it's done.
Right. So if something's happening across the world, you can't really see how it's being made, who's making it, what conditions they're living under.
How much they're getting paid.
How much they're getting paid, what it's made out of, what kind of chemicals go into the processing.
Customer service, nobody to stand behind the product.
That's something that I hadn't thought of. So if you call up because something went wrong with what you bought, you are calling across the world, right? So there's not much accountability in anything, right? Because it's so far disconnected. So that's kind of where we are now. And what we think about, has anybody taken economics, an economics class? We talk about exports and imports and how we should just let certain regions that are really good at clothing manufacturing do the clothing manufacturing, even if they're across the world. And if we're really good at tourism, we should just do tourism. But that has a lot of implications too. If you're just really good at one thing and you just do one thing, what happens if that one thing goes downhill?
Everything's expensive.
Everything what?
It's expensive.
So first of all, you kind of are reliant on importing everything because you can only make jackets. So that means everything else has to come from elsewhere. So if something happens and nobody wants jackets anymore, you don't have anything going on, right? And you kind of have no money left to buy anything else. So it's not very stable. It has no accountability. So let's try to zoom in and try to figure out what would make more sense. Would it make more sense? It might be better to have an American economy, right? An economy where we know everything is being made in the States. And that's what politicians talk about a lot. They say we should have made in America products and we want to bring manufacturing back to the States. But still, an American economy is gigantic. I mean, or even if you're talking about North America, that's huge. So if somebody in Mexico is making something, you don't know how they're being treated. You don't know what's going into that process or anything. So maybe it doesn't make sense to have things made or to have economies organized on a national scale. Maybe it would make more sense to have it on a state scale. But still, there could be, things go on in Boston that we have no idea about, and Boston doesn't always care about us out in the Berkshires, and there's not so much integration, right? And also, the other thing is that Boston has a lot of money and a lot of colleges and a lot of high-tech firms. In the Berkshires, we don't really have all that. We have a lot of beautiful landscapes and wood and grass, and we have some pretty good human resources too. But it can be very unbalanced, right? So what if we organized our economy by a region, by a place that's more defined by a geography and culture and kind of resources? So what if we looked at the Berkshires? I might have just answered some of these questions, but could you guys talk about what you like about the Berkshires? Or what's distinctive about the Berkshires? What are some of the things that make the Berkshires distinctive or valuable, or even just the things that you like about it here?
Like Green River Ambrosia.
What's that?
Green River Ambrosia. It's like wine company.
Okay, so certain businesses.
Yeah, the small businesses and the local. It's more local here than it is in New York, definitely.
So just the culture of small businesses here is something that makes the Berkshires different. Yep. Other things, like you could talk about human resources or natural resources or just things that you like about the Berkshires.
You can actually find food that was grown pretty close by.
So there's still local agriculture. There's still room for farming. So that's a natural resource. We have land that can produce food. We have really nice, rich rivers and riverbeds and valleys that have good growing land. Other natural resources?
Maple syrup.
Maple syrup, yep. So trees that produce maple syrup. The trees themselves for wood. Anything else? I have such a tickle in my throat. What about human resources? What are some of our human resources? The things that are valuable that are not really natural resources. We have Berkshire Community College. We have Williams College. We have really rich arts organizations. So we have great theater and a lively playwriting community and film production. So those are all kind of human resources, things that make the Berkshires special. Is there anything else that we should talk about?
We have pretty good public schools, right?
We have good public schools. Yep, that's really important. Before college, you need some good schools. So we have pretty good support for public schools. So this is the kind of economy, and this is the kind of view of an economy that this woman would have advocated for. This is Jane Jacobs, and she wrote a book called Cities and the Wealth of Nations, and she argued that we should think about economies in terms of regions, usually centered around cities and then the regions around them. But instead of nations or the whole world, we should organize our economies in terms of regions. And in her writing, she talked about import replacement, which is the process of replacing some imports, all different kinds, with local production. And she called this the engine for economic productivity and economic development. So she said that this is the key. If you can do this, you're going to have a strong economy. So why is this going to make your economy stronger? Well, if you think about it, when you're importing things, so say I buy something on Amazon, I'm importing that book from elsewhere. And I'm sending money outside of the Berkshires to get that book inside the Berkshires, right? So that means I have less money, but I have the book. If we could make the book here instead, people would be sending us money so we could send them the book. So we'd have more money here. And we would also have people making books, and we would have people writing books, and we would have, so it kind of builds on itself, and it keeps your economy stronger if you can be producing locally instead of importing. Are there any, that's kind of a very brief view of import replacement. Are there questions right now before I give you some examples? So this is also what E.F. Schumacher, who is the namesake of the place I work, Schumacher Center, this is what he argued as well. He argued that production from local resources for local needs is the most rational way of economic life, while dependence on imports from afar and the consequent need to produce for export to unknown and distant peoples is highly uneconomic and justifiable only in exceptional cases. So he's basically saying it makes much more sense to produce as much as you can for yourself within a region than it doesn't make as much sense to just produce one thing and import everything else, because then you're just sending it to people you don't know, you're getting stuff from people you don't know, and you're dependent on just one thing. So if nobody wants that thing anymore, you're sunk because you don't have any way of making money. So that's kind of what happened in Cuba, for example, and I just visited Cuba, and when Castro took over, they were basically just growing sugarcane for rum. They were making rum from the sugar they grew. So they were either exporting sugar or exporting rum. Not much else. Tobacco and rum and sugar. So when we said we're not going to buy anything and we're not going to allow anybody from America to buy any sugar, rum, or tobacco from Cuba, we were their biggest market, and that completely wiped out their economy because they were so dependent on those three things. They couldn't produce anything for themselves because all of their land, all of their knowledge, everything was devoted to tobacco, sugar, and rum. So when they couldn't do that anymore, make any money on it, they were completely wiped out. So that's just one example of why you would want to have a more diverse local economy that can produce more for itself. So some of the reasons why import replacement is a great way to develop an economy and is good for an economy is that you can build wealth locally. So this is one reason why we have BerkShares. And this is just a graph that shows you what happens when you spend money at a chain restaurant or chain retailer as opposed to an independent retailer. So a chain retailer would be Target or Trader Joe's or something. Independent retailer would be the Book Loft or Church Street Trading Company or Seeds, all on Main Street or Railroad Street in Great Barrington. So when you spend money in a chain, the money that you spend, only 13.6% of it is going to stay in your community. All of this, all the rest of it, is going to leave your community. So the chain retailer, because Target, let's say Dollar General, is based in Tennessee. Most of the money is going to go to Tennessee. And only 13.6% is going to stay here because they're going to pay some people to work there. They're going to maybe pay rent, or they maybe bought the land, or they might pay some taxes, but very little stays. If you were going to spend your money instead at Guido's or any of those other local stores I just talked about, retailers, 48% stays in your own community. So half of what you spend stays. And then you can see what, like this is what leaves, I guess, but this is what stays. So some of it goes to profit and labor, some to procurement, some of it, so that means they're buying from, like Guido's bought local cabbage or something like that. Then they're going to buy locally, they're going to give locally, charitable giving. So basically, it's much better for your own community if you spend your money in local businesses. And that's been proven over and over again. And that's a compilation of a lot of different studies, those graphs right there. So you also, when you have local businesses, when you have import replacement businesses, and you're making stuff here instead of importing it, you're going to have more jobs. And usually they're going to be better jobs because they're not going to be just working at Target or Walmart and getting paid minimum wage and having no benefits, but they're going to be local employers who care more about the people who are working for them. So they're going to pay better. They're going to have more career opportunities in the long run because you might actually have a relationship with the owner. You might learn from the owner, and you'll probably, you could even have a chance to take over that business in the long run. So the jobs are going to be better, and there's going to be more local jobs if you have more local businesses. You'll also, so this is Excelsior Printing, and they printed BerkShares for us. They're in North Adams, and they are an offshoot of Crane Paper, which is a manufacturer of paper that makes our U.S. currency, and they made the paper for BerkShares. So this is a really cool business that's right here. It's really high-end printing, really secure. They print currencies for small countries around the world, and that's right in the Berkshires. So that's a cool example of something that we could be importing. We could be importing printing services or paper, but instead we're making it here. So import replacement also spurs innovation and builds expertise, because if you have to do something here instead of importing it, you have to figure out how to do it here. You have to figure out what the right scale of the business is, what the right machines are. So one example of that is agriculture. So in the Berkshires, we don't have huge scale agriculture, right? You don't have gigantic fields forever like they do in the Midwest. We have kind of hills and dales and valleys, and you have to figure out how to grow things in smaller spaces. So you might need different equipment. You can't have the gigantic combine that takes up this whole room. You have to have a combine that is more human scale and can just farm smaller plots. So that means you have to build that machine, right? You have to innovate and figure out what the right machine is for that job. This is another example, a local example. The Magic Flute Company is in Sheffield. They make ukuleles, and now they make violins and banjolales. And they, in order to make their instruments here, which they're very dedicated to, they had to come up with a whole different design. So these ukuleles don't exactly look like most ukuleles, right? Because most ukuleles are made in China. They're made out of wood, and they're shaped like the ukulele's always shaped, right? These are shaped differently. They're made out of plastic on the back. They're made of wood on the head and the neck, and they're all put together in the Berkshires. So they're employing, I think they employ 9 people, and they had to use a lot of brain power and innovation to come up with that design that works to make it here in the Berkshires. It also requires a lot of expertise. So Dale right here is an engineer. His son Josh is training to be an engineer, and his wife has run the business from the beginning with them. So she's an expert in customer service and marketing. So that's a lot of expertise that wouldn't be here if they were just all working at Target. So it's a different kind of thing to have those people in our community, and Phyllis is going to come speak to us later in the course, than it would be to have a non-local business. So what you end up with, if you have a lot of import replacement businesses, is kind of a more diverse, interesting, healthy community. Because it's not just about the economy. When you have a strong economy, you also usually have a more healthy community. Can any of you think of, like, from where maybe Josh, can you compare Columbia County to the Berkshires in terms of how a strong economy translates into a strong community?
There's like no community where Columbia County really. There's much more of a community in the Berkshires. I've noticed. Yeah, it's just kind of like large scale businesses, and there's not much local going on there.
So you can have kind of a more lively and, I don't know. I think it feels better to have an economy, a local economy. It turns into a stronger, healthier community. So I'll just give you some quick examples of different import replacement opportunities. So right now, we have a lot of timber in the Berkshires, right? We have some logging, we have a lot of trees. We actually used to have a lot fewer trees because the settlers came here and wiped out, they kind of clear-cut all of New England, which is not good. I'm not advocating for that. But right now we have a lot more trees than we've had in a long, long time. And we could probably harvest some responsibly. But instead, we harvest our trees, we send them to Canada, and then we import trees from Canada. So that doesn't quite make sense, because we could just be doing it all here, right? So somebody here is trying to do that. So Will Conklin, he runs Greenagers in Great Barrington, and he also is a sawyer, which is somebody who saws wood, mills wood. He has a portable sawmill where he uses local lumber, and he saws it into usable planks and boards and everything that you might need wood for, to build a house, to build tables. His sawmill is kind of too small right now to do big scale projects. He would like to have a bigger permanent sawmill, but this is an example of an import replacement business. He runs a business based on this, and he sent me these pictures of the tables that he built for his wedding out of local wood that he milled himself. I guess they're not done in this picture, but he said that they built their own tables, so they didn't have to rent them. They didn't have to rent plastic ones that had been sent from who knows where. They had their own wood tables, and then those tables were used at 3 other weddings already. So I don't know if he's renting them or if he sold them or what, but that's a pretty cool import replacement example. There's also lots of furniture makers in the Berkshires. A lot of our furniture is imported from who knows where. IKEA has cheap furniture, but you don't know where it's coming from or where it's made. But we could be using our wood to make furniture. Another, probably one of the most popular import replacement businesses these days is breweries. So this is what the Budweiser factory looks like. And I think they were just making ads. Has anybody seen the ads recently for Budweiser they were like trying to sound local? Because they have breweries all over the country, and you want to find your most local Budweiser brewery, you can just look on a map. It's probably, for us, it would still be like in Ohio or something. So not very local. Whereas Big Elm is in Sheffield, and we know the owners, and We can go visit the factory. We can see what they make, where they make their beer. And I would say it tastes a lot better too, because it's a lot fresher and more interesting. This is a Framingham, Massachusetts version of Big Elm, the Jack's Abbey. And breweries, local breweries, are so successful right now. I mean, they're popping up everywhere. And it's a great example of something that we have been, for a long time, people just bought whatever kind of beer from wherever, and now, and it might have been based on the brand identity, but not on the local identity. So now people are more interested in local beer. And one great part of bringing this kind of manufacturing back to local economies is that it uses unused resources. This is in Framingham, so Jack's Abbey is in Framingham, which is a suburban town outside of Boston, and it used to be very dynamic, but it kind of turned into a bedroom community for Boston. So basically people just live there and commute to work in Boston, and there's not much going on. But it used to have this big paper factory, and it's huge amount of infrastructure, a beautiful brick building that takes up a lot of space in downtown, but it's been abandoned for a long time. Jack's Abbey is doing so well now that they're going to move into this space, and they're going to make it happen again. So it's not just going to be empty and falling apart and ugly. They're going to actually make it useful. So that's a great example of why you'd want to bring manufacturing back. Because, like, for example, in Pittsfield, we have a lot of empty infrastructure that has been abandoned, or there's a lot of kind of excess that we could be using. Here's a local example of an import replacement business. This is Monterey Cheese, which you probably have all tasted, from Rossenbrook Farm. And Sue Salou, the owner, liked to make cheese. She used to just make a lot of it, but she couldn't make it in a way that was USDA approved because she didn't have a big enough pasteurizer. She didn't have the milking room that was approved. So she got a loan, and she got all that stuff, and she's built this beautiful brand, Monterey Cheese, that's now been around for 30 years, and everybody in the Berkshires knows. And we used to not even know what Chev was and import most of our cheese, but now we can have a local cheese that tastes much better and that comes from goats that you can go visit. Here's an example from Brooklyn of cleaning products that are made in Brooklyn that are made by hand, actually. So they're not, you can talk to the woman whose company it is, and she can tell you it's not toxic, and you know, she puts her hands in it, so it's not going to be toxic. And she sells on Etsy. And this is an example that Caroline will probably touch on, which is fiber. So clothes, and this is something that we could totally do in the Berkshires. We could grow more wool. We could raise more sheep and use the wool to produce clothing. But right now this cycle is very different. It's not quite as circular, and it usually comes from Vietnam. And we don't know where our wool comes from either. So these are my sheep and my wool, not my scarf, but these are, so we could be doing a lot more in this area too. So these are just some examples in different areas. And what I'd like you to do at the end of class, we can talk a little bit more, but over the week, I'd like you to just brainstorm possible other ideas that could fit in this category of import replacement. And if you have other ideas, go for it. Brainstorm them too, but I just wanted to get you going with import.